Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Platitude Era podcast. Thank you for listening to us wherever you listen to podcasts, such as the Anchor app, Spotify, Castbox, and now Google Podcasts. Thank you for watching this podcast on YouTube by searching at Platitude Era. So, in this episode of the podcast, we're going to review the movie Shazam. Now, I've been watching a lot of movie critics and reviewers talk about movies, provide their recommendations. And I was wondering if you agree with me that our first category we should talk about should be the marketing of a movie. What do you think?
It's your show. You do as you please.
All right. Now, why I want to talk about marketing now is because I don't watch a YouTuber's review of a movie if I really want to see a movie itself. I feel that if I watch a YouTube critic talk about a movie, review a movie, they start spoiling and giving things away, and I don't have the same reaction for the movie as I would have going in cold. What are your thoughts about that?
Suppose it depends on the movie. If I'm very heavily interested in, I'd probably want to avoid it. If it's something I didn't really care that much about, then by all means.
So, in a way, you could say it's the marketing that makes you want to see the movie more than the film critic itself, correct?
Well, I think the marketing is the inciting incident, but then a critic's review can be the cementing point that makes me finally want to go see a movie.
So, before watching Shazam, did you watch any critics' reviews before the movie?
I might have seen one, I think, perhaps, but seeing how information, it didn't seem to matter because I already wanted to see the movie.
Same here. I didn't watch any critics before because I wanted to see the movie, and I think the marketing for this was very effective. It drew me in a sense that the marketing was pushed as, hey, this movie, it's Tom Hanks in Big, but if he would have woken up as a superhero grown up and not just a regular grown up.
Yeah, like I can't like really name I can't name my sources right now, but there's sometimes I watch a trailer for a movie and I think, "Oh, it just looks like a remake of this but with a different spin." And I was thinking the same thing when I was watching the first trailers for Shazam. It's like, "Oh, it's just big." But I don't know. I guess whatever the first trailer was kind of enticed me enough where it wasn't a detractor for me. It got me to go into the movie theater opening weekend without my arms folded going harumph.
And the posters as well, you saw the billboards, the posters everywhere, also draw you in to watch the movie. You have this big, muscular superhero, like a Superman type superhero, doing these kid things like chewing bubblegum and blowing bubbles or texting on his phone. So that really drove me in. The marketing for this movie I feel was great. I give it an A+ on the marketing.
Yeah, it definitely shows that you're going in for a much more different experience than you have been for all of the other DC movies. I mean, everything has been so dark, drab, bleak. Every other thesaurus entry I can look up for out and out gritty and boring. Whereas this, like, it's Wonder Woman kind of starts that, but it still kind of has a more drab looking, visual to style to it. Uh, Aquaman, it feels like it's kind of borrowing from like Thor Ragnarok, where it wants to be more colorful, and it kind of is. It's bonkers. It feels like a whole lot of colorful, lighthearted nonsense. But I feel like Shazam. I guess maybe that was the thought of this movie from the get go. How it wanted to be more lighthearted, and it doesn't really care. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but it it feels more loose, and it pays off in huge dividends for this movie.
And what about the story? What are your thoughts?
Uh, I I So I was watching this and I was kind of thinking, well, for my like initial reaction for this movie is I'm gonna say this is probably the most fun I've had watching a movie in a real long time. Sorry, Marvel. As much as I enjoyed Infinity War, like this this felt like just a huge up, and it came from DC. Who knew? But like I saw some reviews, and like I was thinking about this when I was watching after I saw the movie. I was thinking about this. I'm all over the place. When I was watching the movie, I was thinking about this one thing, and I saw some reviews that mentioned it, and I'm like, oh, so I'm not the only one. This movie kind of reminds me of when I first saw Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. It has this, I don't know, it has this quality to it of just like, it kind of, I don't know, just this X factor to it that kind of like reintroduced me to superhero movies, or like reminded me how unique and interesting or fun or whatever a superhero movie could be.
Wow, I didn't have that experience. I saw Sam Raimi's Spider Man, and when I was watching that movie, I did feel like it reintroduced me into a good superhero movie, a movie that told a good story. And I felt like I've been waiting 100 years to watch a Spider-Man movie. When I was watching this movie, Shazam, um, for me, I felt like they discovered or reinvented or developed a new formula that actually works. In this movie, um, they did the switcheroo thing. You're expecting to see a typical comic book movie with some jokes, but this really, for me, felt like a dramatic film. I was watching a drama, and then it takes place in a world of comic books, and then it adds the humor to it. So this was, I don't know what you would call it, a gumbo, a cake with
Mm-hmm.
layers or something, but this one, it did take me for a ride, and I liked where it took me for the ride. So pretty much I felt the same way you did, but I didn't share that connection with Spider-Man. I just felt like this was something completely different.
Mm. I kind of feel the opposite way about you, where you're saying this is a drama. For me, I felt like this started off as a comedy, kind of being like a spin on like comic book movies in general, and then it like, because it's a comic book movie, it has to have dramatic elements, like i.e. the bad guy, or you know, uh, character conflicts or whatever.
And I think there's a new superhero formula in the works now, because in this movie, in the story, they do talk about Batman and Superman, but it seems like when they were making this movie, they're like, well, nobody knows who Shazam is. Shazam's the new kid in school, and he just needs those two popular friends to say, hey, this guy's cool, give him a chance. So that's how they introduced Batman and Superman. It's like, hey, Shazam's cool, give him a chance. But by the end of the movie, I felt like it flipped. It was like, hey, Shazam is cool. Now look at Batman and Superman. These references are pretty much like, hey, don't forget about us, because Shazam's so cool now.
Well, I mean, like, the way I feel is that we've been having bad Batman and Superman movies for a while now, so you're kind of forgetting how good they can be. Like, after watching Spider-Man Homecoming, after watching two bad Amazing Spider-Man movies, I'm like, wow, this is how good Spider-Man can be. So I mean, the Dark Knight trilogy is good and all, but and maybe you could have like more lighthearted, fun, comic book. I don't know. Filmmakers have been taking themselves too seriously, and it's nice to have this refreshing change of pace of, hey, lighten things up, and you'll have an enjoyable time at the movie theater and a more memorable time in the movie theater.
And I am so excited this modern comic book era, this new phase of comic book films, where lesser known characters are making great films. Aquaman, it was okay, but it did do well at the box office, so that means people did like watching the movie about a lesser known superhero. Shazam now, lesser known superhero, incredible movie. And when Marvel first started its phases and everything, they made their movies based around lesser known characters, Iron Man and Captain America. So it seems like you have that freedom when you make a movie about a lesser known character to recreate the origin story, something completely different, because people don't know him as well and won't complain when there's changes.
Yeah, I feel like if you're watching the progression of the DC movies, you can kind of like, if Man of Steel and Batman v Superman are kind of like steep, like these dark gritty, like this interpretation of these movies, and then as the like get into Wonder Woman, it's kind of still into there, and it was a pretty good movie, but it doesn't do anything wildly special for me. And then you go into Aquaman, which is kind of moving away from that more. It's kind of half in, half out, because it started with Zack Snyder's vision, and then it's kind of stepping its way out. And then Shazam feels like the fresh start. This is like what Flashpoint, I guess, was supposed to be, which I don't think is ever coming out. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But Shazam feels like a fresh start, and just, hey, forget everything of the old. Here's the new. Here's our DC reboot, sort of. and here's what we have to offer to you. So because it's not mired in all of the old stuff that Zack Snyder created, and it's kind of free to do whatever it wants, then it's able to play with the content it has and with a character that nobody's not heavily invested in. It can take chances, it can take risks, and be more interesting.
And this movie did what every comic book movie does, or every other movie that has existed. I was watching a critic after Shazam saying, not only did this movie in the marketing show you that it was going to be big, but they actually did take scenes from the movie Big and threw it in there. So this movie borrowed a lot from other movies, but in a way, it kind of made it its own. For example, if you're watching any superhero origin story, the hero, like in the middle of the movie, is learning his abilities, and then by the third act he's like a Jedi master, a kung fu master. He knows all his abilities. What I loved what this movie did was, yes, he's learning his abilities, and then by the climax, by the end of the film, he's still learning more.
Well, it's kind of, I mean, because he's still a kid, so, like, technically, like, younger than Peter Parker as Spider-Man or whatever, even younger than Tobey Maguire. But oh, he has these powers and he's learning how to use them, but he still also needs to take the responsibility. He has this great power, but he doesn't have this great responsibility yet, and he's still kind of learning and figuring that out. So, I mean, you can have the parallel between Spider-Man and Shazam here, where, hey, I'm a kid and I need to fight bad guy, but I'm still a kid and I'm afraid.
Now, what did you think about the acting? Unless you want to talk something else about the story, I'm ready to talk about the acting.
Well, just like in general, like, so it's interest. This movie feels like a mishmash of a few movies, but not in a bad way. Like, so it's like the comedic highs are so tremendously high. Like, normally I'm a huge curmudgeon and I hate things, but like with this movie, I was like genuinely enjoying myself. It was just like I'm not laughing out loud, guffawing during this thing, but like I have a smile on my face. I'm like, oh, this feels like so fun and refreshing for me. I was just enjoying myself throughout all the Shazam bits. But then like it'll take dips where like, oh, here's a generic, like they have a bad guy. Here's generic bad guy. The bad guy doesn't feel like anything special to me. It just feels like a generic superhero movie bad guy. So it didn't, like, oh, Thanos. Oh, he reintroduced what superhero villains are supposed to be. And this guy, it's like, it's just bad guy with kind of the same powers as good guy. Feels like old Marvel or any other, superhero movie in that tired formula. And then there's weird moments where this movie's also a horror movie because this movie's directed by a horror director. Like, I see reviews or whatever. It's like, oh, this is like a kid's movie, except for the part where a giant scary monster bites off somebody's head and they focus on that for a while. So, I mean, it's super interesting how it mishmashes these different genre types, and they don't always gel together, but I mean, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure a bunch of kids are going to have nightmares.
This is like Goonies for the new age, or
except it doesn't suck.
Except it doesn't suck. And then going into the acting, the little kid that plays Shazam before he becomes a superhero, I forgot the name of the alter ego. It's
Billy Batson.
Billy Batson. The kid is great. He's great at pulling off the drama. His character is going through these dramatic arcs, and he's able to play the drama very well.
I thought it was like, for me, I don't know about for you, but I felt like when he's like the chemistry between his friend, like the kid from It, and Shazam feels like way better chemistry than when you'd see like Billy on screen and the kid from It. Like the Billy Batson he's kind of meh. He's kind of like more down in the dumps. He doesn't make as many jokes, and he's not having as much fun as Shazam. So I felt that was kind of a little off kilter for me.
Oh, I see. And then in my situation, I was just the way that I was distracted because the way that the acting was set up. The kid, Billy Batson, his whole thing in the movie was he was a dramatic part, and then when he Shazammed and became what's the name of the other guy? Shazam, Sean Levy.
Yeah, Zachary Levi.
Zachary Levi. When he became Zachary Levi, he was the comedic part, and I don't know if he his acting was based off the kid or something, but he didn't look like an adult to me yet. As the movie progressed, as he was a superhero, as it was going on, I saw him more as a kid. just really tall and muscular than an adult.
Yeah, see that's kind of like, well, to me, like, oh, Zachary Levi, he's doing a great job as a kid, and then the kid that plays Billy Batson, he's like, I guess he's doing a great job as an angsty teen.
Good point there.
Like
And
the character didn't, like, it didn't feel, it felt like two sides of completely separate coins. You know what I mean? Like, Billy Batson wasn't this fun, energetic, lighthearted character when he was Billy Batson. He was that when he was Shazam.
yeah, that's what I noticed, and that's what I felt too. The little kid was one side of the coin; he was a dramatic part, and then Zachary Levi was the comedic part. So depending on what was going on in the scene, that's when the coin would flip, and that's whatever appeared. That's what you got based on what was going on in the movie. And also, what about Mark Strong? I felt that he did a good job as well. He played the supervillain right there on the line. He didn't go too far to one side where he was a comic book supervillain or a Saturday morning cartoon villain, and he didn't go to the other side where he was too serious. He was right there on the line always, and he played it right. He held my attention, and I never said, "Oh my God, look at this guy." No, I give him props. Mark Strong, I feel that he's a good actor in any role that he takes.
Yeah, I mean, it was, classic Strong. He did a good job. But for me, like, see, like, that's what I'm saying, where like the movie kind of, shifts tone, or it kind of dips, where like, oh, the villain feels kind of generic, because like when you're watching Shazam and he's learning his powers or whatever, it feels kind of meta, and it's taking like jabs at the superhero genre. Where I feel like the movie could have been elevated for me more if Mark Strong played more of a cartoon, like if he was Doctor Evil. I mean, he kind of looks like him to begin with. So if it was kind of a more sarcastic, like if he was deadpan serious, but like, all of the stuff he was doing was kind of like, if, as an observer, you're seeing like, this is kind of nonsensical. Like, you're kind of a bad guy for no real good reason. You're just a bad guy just cause. Like, I wish the movie kind of took that. I wish like it was a little bit more meta in that regard, because it would have elevated the movie for me, like I said.
I didn't even think about that or notice that, but now that you mentioned it, now I wish it would have gone that route.
Yeah, it would have been an A+ movie for me, if just like, because if the whole thing was taking a jab, like I said, like, oh, every time Shazam's on screen, it's the best part. Every time I see the villain on screen, it's Mark Strong being Mark Strong, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I've seen it a million and one times before. Take a different spin on the bad guy, because all of DC villains, who cares? Almost make him a serious version of Mark Zuckerberg when he played Lex Luthor.
Oh, that would have been perfect. You hit
Mm-hmm.
the nail on the head.
Yeah,
That
without the like goofy, high pitched, squealy voice. Just he's just kind of a cartoon character. If he was like a wrestling villain, a wrestling heel, where like he's doing bad guy stuff, but like you can see the humor in it because it's kind of ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it needed. I guess maybe in the next movie they could get a wrestler to play the villain.
Yeah, but who's available? Dave Bautista?
Did you want to say anything else about the acting before we move on to the directing?
Uh, eh. Zachary Levi stole the show as well. He should have. He's the star of the movie. The little cripple kid was pretty good too. The all those foster kids, they were all right. They were serviceable. No,
Yeah.
no one else was really out there for me.
Nobody put the movie on halt, or the movie, like with their performance, nobody had such a bad performance that it felt like the movie came to a stop.
Nah, not to my tastes.
As far as the directing was great. He did the, I guess, standard filmmaking. Everything was shot well. It just, there were no shaky cams. It did a well job of presenting you into this universe. I think there were a couple scenes where Shazam was fighting the villains that it seemed like you were actually watching a comic book come to life.
Can you elaborate a little more? I think I can see where you're going, but give me a little more gristle to chew on.
I think it was in the climax when Shazam was fighting the Mark Strong character.
Mm-hmm.
and they were fighting in the air, and they were crashing, and they would go through buildings. I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
and I just felt like, oh, I could see this being an image in a comic book, and then somebody taking that panel and saying, okay, now let's turn this into a scene in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So I was watching some of those scenes, and you did see those scenes in a movie. It was in 2013. It was called Man of Steel, when two big guys were punching themselves
Oh,
through buildings.
you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, in this movie, what's interesting, Man of Steel had way too much collateral damage, where you knew Superman ended up killing more people than helping. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
in this one, it seemed that the fight scenes in the city were more contained, and there wasn't any casualties at all.
Like here, like so when I was watching those fight scenes and I was noticing parallels with Man of Steel, and I specifically noticed like the bad guy punches Shazam to the ground or vice versa. I specifically noticed when one of the characters would hit the ground, he would crack, like the pavement would crack, but you're not seeing a huge crater. Like they were like turning the dial way down on the destruction because I don't know, maybe because people were like, "What about civilian casualties?" Or, "Oh, these guys are so strong and they're destroying the city." So like there's some collateral damage, but like it was greatly reduced. I think just so it wouldn't be making as many comparisons as those Superman movies.
And while they were fighting, I completely forgot that there were residents in the city because I was having such a good time watching the fight scenes
Mm-hmm.
that I forgot. I thought they were fighting in like ghost towns or abandoned cities. I never stopped once to think, wait, what about the people that live in the city? Are they getting hurt or what?
Well, I mean, it's not really a spoiler, but like, hey, they're fighting like in the skyline. Well, there's a couple of scenes that are like have fights like in crowded-ish areas, but they don't really interact too heavily with like crowds. It's not like knocking buildings over or anything that major. It's either like in the sky or into a nice clearing.
Yeah, like for example, I know there's one scene where like one of the guys with superpowers punches the other guy. To avoid
Mm-hmm.
spoilers, I'm not going to say who's who, and they crash through a wall, and the hole they make in the wall is just about body size. So it's not like a big hole, and then the building collapses just because it's going to look cool on film. This was just like you said, self-contained damage, minimal
Mm-hmm.
damage for minimal casualty loss. Now, what's your recommendation for the movie?
I mean, it's 100% go see it. I mean, if my initial statements of this being one of the most fun times I've had in the movies in a while, it wasn't enough to entice you to go see the movie, then I don't know what else I can tell you.
My recommendation for this movie, I've never said this about a movie for this year. It's going to be don't miss it. You do whatever you can to watch this movie in theaters. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a good example here, real life situation. My dad, he's not a big fan about movies, doesn't care about movies. He'll fall asleep at the theater. He'll just get up and walk out of a movie. But he actually sat through the whole movie, didn't fall asleep, laughed, enjoyed it, had a good time. Based on my dad's reactions and what I felt watching the movie, this is don't miss it.
Mm-hmm. I guess I should see this movie then.
Yes, yes, please do. Now, this is the part of the show right after our recommendations where we get into the spoiler section where we talk about spoilers. I believe we're going to have some light spoilers, a few spoilers. So, this is a little spoiler warning. But we're not going to get into too much spoilers in this review because we want you guys to see this movie and not be spoiled. So, you're welcome to stay and hang out for this light spoiler section, or you're welcome to pause it, watch the movie, then come back so we can have a spoiler discussion with you people. All
What if I
right.
didn't want to talk about spoilers?
I'm not going to talk about heavy spoilers. I'm just going to talk about light spoilers here because
Well,
I
what are
really
your
do
light
want people.
spoilers?
Oh, man. I don't know. I know
See?
there was some stuff in the back of my mind that I did want to talk about, but
Well,
I
there's
know.
one specific moment. It's a heavy spoiler, so I'm guessing you don't want to talk about it. But like, there was the one heavy spoiler that actually got an applause from the audience, and I felt like it was warranted. Where like sometimes, the audience applauds at stupid stuff, like, "Hey, Captain America put a shield on." Like, okay, yeah, he does that in every fucking movie. We're like, but this movie does something that you don't expect because A, nobody gives a shit about Shazam, and B, I don't know, you don't see something like this, I guess, but it does a super cool thing, and it was a genuinely awesome moment.
I'll leave it up
And
to
you'll know it
you.
when you see it, audience. I'm not going to say if you don't want to talk about it, but
All right.
it was genuinely awesome.
So that's it as far as spoilers. We don't have any heavy
Well,
spoilers to talk
wait,
about.
hold on,
Oh,
because you said you know had a lot of lead up to spoilers. So what's your light spoilers?
okay. My
This is your
lights.
if you don't have anything to talk about, I don't know why you bring up the segment at all.
I'm sorry because I was watching the end credits of the movie and I stayed, just to grab my trash. I was not expecting anything at the end, and at the end of the credits, there is a little stinger, and it's just like the funniest thing ever. And I really don't want to give it away. So one spoiler I could give you guys here, if you really want a light spoiler here, if you really want a spoiler, take my word for it. I'm declaring right now, I'm putting my gavel down and saying the rivalry between DC and Marvel, it's over. Marvel used to be ahead of DC. Marvel was the greatest thing. There was this rivalry, DC guys, Marvel guys, but now it's over. With this movie, Shazam, DC and Marvel, they are now on the same level. It's over. The feud is over. DC, Marvel, they're getting along now. They're best friends now. They're hanging out. They're doing stuff. It's over.
All right.
That's the only light spoiler I can give you guys here. The only spoiler I could say. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're good.
Yeah, I only introduced this segment because there might have been something that you wanted to talk about, and I just wanted to keep it light because I really do want people to check out this movie. They have to check out this movie. I mean, if I could and it wasn't a criminal offense, I would grab as many people as I can, throw them in my van, and drive them to the movie theater just so they can see it. And if I did make money from AdSense, I would even buy them their ticket. I'd say, hey, I'm not such a bad guy. Sure, I kidnapped you and took you to the movies, but I'm buying the ticket because you have to see this movie.
If there's one movie you're gonna skip this year, make it Captain Marvel.
Everybody, thank you for listening to our podcast, whether it's on one of your apps such as Anchor, Spotify, Castbox, Google Box. I think from you and from me, we want to thank Anchor app. They let you record podcasts, and this podcast is made possible through the technology of Anchor. Also, if you want to watch our podcast on the YouTubes because you're YouTube addicted, you can check us out at YouTube. Keep up with us socially on Twitter at Platitude Era or on Instagram at Platitude Era Show. And goodbye, everybody. I'm leaving you the closing word. Anything you want to add?